Hey everybody, it's Chris today in a pre-recorded video. Howie thought he was going to be live from Berlin this week, but unfortunately he's not going to be able to be back at his computer and able to stream at the time that the live stream happens in Berlin time. So much like we did a few weeks ago when he was on a train traveling during the podcast, we're going to air a couple of interviews today. That he has done. Neither of these have been published anywhere yet, so this is a premiere for them. But we will have these couple of interviews. He'll have dispatches, his articles that he's been writing to accompany each of them pretty soon. So this show is going to be a little bit short. Originally, there was going to be 3 interviews, but the third one with Dennis Pilash, who we've talked to on this show before, so you can go back and watch his past episode that we had him as a guest. But Dennis's interview was 90 minutes long, and I was notified, or I saw the email, I guess, is the more accurate way to say it, about 2 hours before the stream. So I do not have time to download and get that one ready to air today. But the 2 that we are going to have, the Dennis one will also be released, pretty quickly onto YouTube and through the dispatches. But the 2 that we are going to have today, the first one's a short interview with Taras Bilous. He's a Ukrainian leftist and soldier who won the Daniel Singer Prize. And then our second interview is with Lela Rekhshiavili, a Georgian leftist, and she's going to talk with Howie about how the Georgian and international left need to break from we kind of need to break out of the EU versus Russia's choices paradigm, and chart an internationalist, independent, anti-capitalist path. So we're going to have those 2 interviews airing today, and then hopefully Howie will be live next week as usual. This is just one of the pitfalls of, there's definitely plenty of pros to Howie traveling right now. We're getting a lot of great guests. He's doing a lot of great interviews. He's, had a really good trip. But one of the cons is traveling is that it doesn't always, his schedule doesn't always align with when this podcast is happening. So thank you everybody for tuning in this week. I'll plug it again. Everybody should go check out newgreenhorizons.us. We're releasing the dispatches that Howie's sending there, as well as at howiehawkins.us. But this is a new blog oriented towards the green space that we've started. We've got weekly new pieces going up. So everybody should go check that out. But enjoy these 2 interviews, and hopefully we'll see you live next week when Howie returns. Thanks.
The Ukrainian Armed Forces, and he just won a prize, the Daniel Singer Prize, for the best socialist essay of the last year, and the $10,000 award he gave to the Solidarity Collectives, who provide support for anarchist and anti-authoritarian fighters, and also members of unions when asked to support them on their material support for their struggles on the front line. So I'm also here with Zakhar Popovich, who has helped me with the translations. So Tara says his English isn't good enough. I think it's pretty good. I understand him, but Zakhar may help. So Taras, tell us, what you want American leftists to know from your perspective.
Firstly, I would like to say thank you for those who support Ukraine all these years, and in general, I don't know, I actually became more pessimistic than I was in first month of the war, when I wrote most of my essays, and I think after Trump's victory we should just think about how to avoid disaster rather than think about how to. Okay, another thing, what what to say. Honestly, I am so tired about this debates on the Western. I was so tired 2 years ago about escalations and why Ukrainians who resist occupation is like why we should resist occupation. For me, it's like obvious that we should resist injustice but now I think the most important is I think this war, of course, is not the last, and I think in the next decades we will face with more and more wars because of like international order and climate disaster and so on, and I think we should prepare for this, and in this situation old cliches already don't work, and I think the left too often think that it's enough to criticize and theorize something, but the main thing is our actions, what we do, and the consequences of our actions, and we should more think about what we can do and where we can influence on the situation to do work better. Yeah, that's all.
Okay, well, Taras, that's a sobering message, but I think people need to hear it. And, you know, the old cliches criticizing, but what's our positive program on the left for peace and security? That's the challenge, I guess you're giving to us, right?
Yes, but 2 years ago when I wrote about what we need a positive agenda, it was another situation, and 2 years ago I hoped that this war ended earlier than it. Of course, we need a positive agenda about more democratic and more more just international order, but I think it's agenda for year. Like we should propose this already now, but the chance for change something in this way can be open only after years of when things became worse and worse. Sorry.
We will turn for better, but after many years of turning to worse.
Yeah.
We feel very pessimistic here in Ukraine.
Sorry.
Well, I think that's something Americans, particularly on the left, need to hear. And so unless you want to add to that, I think that's a clear message, and I will get it back to people. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Hello, everybody. This is Howie Hawkins. I'm here with Lela Rekhshiavili, who is a Georgian activist and academic. She's a political geographer, and she has studied the Georgian economy, the recent movements against the Russian law and the elections. So, Lela, why don't we start with your assessment of the elections? What people hope they would achieve, and what happened, and what's going on now in Georgia.
I'm just to clarify, I have not done research on either the mobilizations against the Russian law nor on the elections themselves. I have done research in Georgia on various social movements, most prominently on the movement of Rioni Valley movement against Namakani hydropower plant. But also some others. I can briefly say about the elections that what we see is a very disappointing and very disillusioning situation in Georgian context, where the opposition or anyone who observed this has really seen very documented and very obvious instances and very generalized instances of falsification of the elections. We have also already seen how the courts have basically refused to take the evidence for the rigging of elections. So the situation is pretty desperate in the sense that it's clear that at this point state institutions, including court, are too weak to engage with, not too weak, but too subordinated to the power hierarchy to engage with it, to seek justice. Which essentially is, and I don't mean to say Georgian Dream Party, the ruling party, also has certain support base, right? This is what some of the leftists would contest and say that they actually are supported. Yes, they actually are supported, but they also, as well, stole voices of many people and falsified voices of many people. We don't need to declare opposition victorious to still be met at the very obvious and very systematic stealing of people's voices. The other sad aspect of this, in all honesty, from my perspective, is that the way opposition has worked against very devastating processes of authoritarian consolidation in Georgia that we see now with the elections very clearly, but we also have been seeing in the past years through enhanced repressions of various movements, including Namakani movement, but also others, and through adoption of the two laws, so-called foreign agent law and LGBT propaganda law, but these are also these are the aspects of authoritarian consolidation that have been very publicly contested and very visible to also international audiences. But there have been other processes as well within Georgian context, like really attempts to subordinate civil society, cultural sphere, academia have started already 2 years ago. And these processes were deepening and spiraling already. So in this sense, huge demonstrations that followed first in 2023 and then in 2024, particularly the adoption to foreign agent law, are not surprising. They're very understandable, because for many it was understandable that this law is really one more and a very powerful step in pressing the authoritarian power. What, on the other hand, I find very sad in this political situation is the discursive and political choices of those that stand in opposition to authoritarian consolidation in Georgian context. That is, Georgian opposition and quite a bit of civil society organizations. And when I say this, I don't mean that I don't support the struggle. When I'm in Georgia, I go to demonstrations, and if I was there, I would go again. But I do think that they have done a terrifying mistake by reducing everything about this ongoing struggle just to Russia-Europe choice and Russia-Europe cleavage. And while there might be a layer of this cleavage, it is also quite an insufficient layer to articulate problems that Georgian society faces, right? But also to articulate even geopolitical situation that Georgia now finds itself in, right? Even for that, Russia-West or Russia-Europe discourse is too thin. Particularly to say from a leftist perspective, because I mean the forces that are now fighting against authoritarianism, or as they call it, against Russia's occupation or Russia's influence in Georgia, those forces are not leftist forces. They're very far from leftist forces, right? But they also, at this point, have the power. I mean, in general, the Georgian left is not big or strong, but they also subordinate those voices from the left, and at least for me, as one of the leftist characters in this political scene, I must say that leftist positions can never collapse into this West versus Russia dichotomy, not in Georgian context and not in any context. And one of the reasons for this, I've been thinking on this, one of the reasons for this is that if you glorify the West and de-problematize the West in a peripheral country like Georgia, so Georgia, I still think maybe the situation will be changing. Maybe Georgia will be becoming more Russia's periphery or China's periphery. But currently Georgia, if it's something's periphery, Georgia is Europe's periphery. And it has been primarily the US and EU that have imposed brutal and dispossessing neoliberal policies on this country. So by obscuring this and by saying that if we come to Europe, all of our sorrows will be cured and we will be protected from Russia, you obscure the space to problematize what has led Georgian society to the type of inequalities, to the type of dispossessions that this country suffers, or most of its population suffers. And let me make it very then clear, right? So to make the example out, let me just tell a bit more story about the protests. So last spring, in spring 2024, there were huge, like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands person mobilizations in the capital against the foreign agent law. Now, after elections in October, there have been also huge demonstrations against rigged elections. Now, in between, there were populations affected by manganese mining from the village called Shukruti that at this point have been on a permanent protesting against the I don't know if you ever have come across, against the unbelievable direct devastation of their living environments. And they have been asking, so they have been out for now I think up to 300 days, protesting in tents, and they're asking just for decent compensation for the loss of their entire livelihoods, their living spaces, their land plots, their And these crowds, in the middle of the summer, also came to the capital city to protest. They occupied the very same space that the protests against this Russian law were occupying. They of course got some degree of solidarity, but absolutely minor. Absolutely minor. Because with this current political scene, and with this story that either you are pro-European or you're pro-Russian, and now you have to choose, and you cannot talk of Europe in any complex ways, or of the West in any complex ways, because that means that you're a traitor, people go saying really terrifying insults, right, on each other. People call out those that supported Georgian Dream as Red Army, right? Like, so you are a traitor if you make any slightly more complex arguments about the role of the West in Georgia's politics than saying Europe will save our asses from everything. But the point is that this type of positioning has obscured any space for any of this opposition to articulate what's the injustice that the people from Shukruti are struggling with. So if you don't say that this is the privatization of resources that followed Rose Revolution, that was engineered by local political elites as well as really US. US has been super active in this. USAID in collaboration with World Bank after the Rose Revolution, that is in early 2000s, have been absolutely crucial in shaping neoliberal policies in Georgia. And then later, when EU became more active in Georgian context, EU has carried this further, right? So if you don't, if you obscure space to name this as injustice and to name the role of the West in producing this type of injustice, in entirely incapacitating the state to, on very basic level, discipline the private companies that have taken over various mining sites. If you can't say that, then you can't find solidarity, of course, with Shukrutian protesters. And in this way, you essentially can't find solidarity with most of Georgia's workers, with most of Georgia's populations that have been affected by commodification of nature. And this, I think, is at heart, I think, of the sad situation in Georgian context, where the opposition is unable to articulate most of population's pain, and Europe will save us is not saving the opposition cause.
Yeah, I was able to talk with leaders of the Shukruti mining disaster and also the people fighting that mega dam, which I know you studied. And talking to people with the mega dam, they said, right now it's the U.S. Embassy trying to find new investors to support the Georgia Dream's plans to get that dam built, even though the U.S. has also got some sanctions on the leadership of the Georgia Dream. And they were looking for some way we could pressure the U.S. government to stop pushing this down, which this movement paused the development of by scaring away the previous investors. And now the U.S. is talking out of one side of its mouth against authoritarian Georgia Dream, and the other side of its mouth trying to do business with it.
Yes, this is the next, and you're bringing up the case. Howie, can we have a slight break? We're good?
We're good.
So what I was trying to tell is that Namapani movement, or the Rioni Valley movement, is one of the examples where you cannot, like the current opposition, for example, will not be able to solidarize with this movement. And one of the reasons is precisely their bland focus on geopolitics, but a specific way of looking at geopolitics only in the Russia versus West dichotomy. And they won't care, like Namapani movement will be one of the movements that the current opposition won't care about fundamentally. And the story of Namohani, not just the movement, but also the hydropower development sector, is also very telling in terms of Europe's role in shaping up Georgia's development politics. So I don't know, I must say, of either Georgian government trying to find a new investor that would be related to the US, or the US trying to find a way to invest either in Namohani hydropower plant or any other hydropower plant. So the US story so far, honestly, for me is not, maybe I'm missing information, but from all the information that I have, US involvement is not there in this particular project. What is there, however, is immense role that the European Union has played in general promoting hydropower as the developmental heyday in Georgia, and reinforcing it recently by approving Black Sea underwater transmission cable. I don't know if you've heard of this. This is a huge project, essentially, that is supposed to connect Azerbaijan through Georgia to Romania and Hungary. So the end station of Hungary, as you know, is playing an increasingly important role in Europe's green transitions, as they are hosting some of the largest Chinese plants for electric battery production. And this underwater cable is basically talked of as enabling the green, so-called green energy corridor through from Azerbaijan to Europe. Besides the fact that we don't know how green this will be, it also, in Georgian context, has undermined all the labor that anti-dam movements, not just Namohani, but also other movements against other huge power plants, particularly in Svanetia, but also elsewhere in Georgia's mountainous regions that have been instigating so much resistance, especially against huge or big hydropower plants. And with Namohani, it really seemed in 2021 that not only did the government need to step back, but even the biggest supporters of this types of development or of the hydropower, that is European banks like European Investment Bank, EIB, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD, they're usually typical investors in such things. They also started talking that Georgia should look at other renewables and not be stuck so much with hydropower. So it really seemed that all the buildup of the resistance had slightly, at least, altered the positions about the sector. And this was reversed once the EU started supporting the underwater cable, because the underwater cable is supposed to carry electricity. Georgian government wants to be able to produce extra electricity for export. What happened since is that Georgian government has restarted talking about attracting investment in all the big contested hydropower plants, but they also, of course, are continuing building of small power plants. Like these are hundreds of power plants. Okay, by 2024, there were 214 memoranda already signed. I mean, 214 hydropower plants. Georgia is a very small country. There is a hydropower plant essentially on all major rivers, either already built or a couple of them already built or planned. And now they have made up lists of next 200 that basically relist again all the previously cancelled projects. So yes, I mean, in this sense, I sometimes tend to say that honestly, if Europe would want to get what they want to get from Georgia, that is energy transit or extra energy production, then I don't think any Georgian government can do it in a democratic way. That's just not the... Georgian people have over and over mobilized against this type of development in the past decade. If this is something that is still being pursued, that can only be done in authoritarian ways. So in this sense, what I mean to say is that we don't just need Europe, we need Europe to fundamentally rethink what kind of development politics it pursues in its peripheries. And the type of development politics that Europe pursues in its peripheries, and this is not just Georgia, right? We also see what Europe has done now, or what European Union has been now doing to Serbia, or other basically peripheral countries around it. They're desperate for energy, and they're willing, or more broadly, this kind of green transitions agenda. They're desperate for energy in particular, and they are willing to support a lot of very problematic ways of implementing energy infrastructure projects and other projects that support green transitions like lithium mining. So we do have, and like hiding this from our side, I think, doesn't help oppositional thinking or movements at all. So that's the way my challenge is, right? And the point is to come back a bit to what you were saying, right? That actually, I do think that it would be better for Georgia if Georgia could continue integrating with Europe, with the hope that Europe then would also take some responsibilities. Because currently what Europe does is liberalize trade, impose regulations, and not be responsible on any costs of this, any social costs of this. I don't know, I don't think these mechanisms are great even for within Europe, but they at least have within Europe certain mechanisms to compensate for the harm and compensate for the loss of various economic processes that they're pushing now on peripheral countries. I don't know, for example, there is a Just Transitions Fund, right, that would support peripheralized regions that are going through transitions or losing out because of their transitions, etc., etc. These are all the resources that are not available for non-member or not even like candidate countries like Georgia. So in a certain way, maybe EU integration would be better than the situation that we have now. But I honestly do think that this should also be then a clear statement that maybe integration is better because it would reduce the harm that is imposed by the EU, and not that we need integration because integration will save us. And EU has been always the kind actor on us, or West has been so nice on us, and now we need to keep being with them. So yeah, I would support EU integration in pragmatic senses, but not for the reasons what the Georgian opposition currently proposes. But importantly, and I think this is a huge risk, I do think that currently for European Union this is very beneficial position, because they can indeed blame everything on Georgian government, but they most likely, both EU and US, will continue working together with the Georgian authoritarian government. And this is a gigantic risk and very plausible scenario too. They will continue working on these various projects, essentially without leaving Georgian society any mechanisms of engaging with the development politics that they are making up together with the Georgian elites. And there is this energy direction, right? And there I think it's clear that the EU will not want to stop severe relations with Georgian government even if it goes authoritarian. And it did go authoritarian at this point, right? I mean, they ultimately falsified elections. And there is also this kind of transit role that Georgia has And there is this is more precarious, let's say, story. It is precarious because of lack of clarity on what positions EU will be taking in relation to China. So while Georgia is currently working through this energy corridor role, it also simultaneously is working through the transport hub and corridor role. And the transport hub would be connecting Europe and China. This is again much like energy caused by Russia's aggression on Ukraine and inability of the trade routes through Russia to work in the past years, and reactivation of what they call middle corridor as one of the alternative routes. So far there is a big risk that EU just will want to work this corridor and be connected to China. And also this way reinforce and support authoritarian government in Georgian context. But this is something that we don't know so well, because I think depending on how US politics plays out in relation to China and how confrontational that gets, what Europe will choose, because Europe has been very undecided about their relationship with China. I think they have started to be more and more cautious, but there is quite a lot of industries that are interested in continued trade, also continued investments in China, continued investments from China. So I think this is more, say, precarious and unclear in this current situation part of the story, but it's also there as one of the underlying stories. And yes, I think normalization of Georgia as an authoritarian state that plays into the hands of all supposedly rival but ultimately well collaborating imperial powers is, I think, a big risk.
Well, I think you've given us a lot to think about, and the left has to have its own alternative. We can't choose between one imperial bloc or the other. And Georgia faces that like many other smaller countries and those of us in the bigger powers. So I think we'll stop there. You gave us plenty to think about, and I appreciate it, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
I'm trying to